The city's morning bustle was a predictable rhythm to Robert, one that he had danced to for as long as he could remember. On this day, the sun streamed in through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Chit Cafe adjoining the bank, casting golden ribbons across the polished wooden floor. Robert's spot, as always, was in the back corner, away from the claimer, granting him a panoramic view of the cafe. Lifting the cup to his lips, Robert relished the scent of freshly ground coffee beans that promised another day of sharp focus. As he paused, emotion caught his attention. He looked up, and for a fleeting moment, his world went still. Across the room was a man whose face seemed to mirror his, almost perfectly. Robert squinted, setting his cup down with a soft clang. The man had the same deep-set blue eyes, the same thin lips, and the same scar below the right eyebrow, a remnant from Robert's childhood folly. But it wasn't just the physical resemblance that took Robert's breath away. The man seemed to echo Robert's very essence, right down to the way he scanned the morning paper and hesitated momentarily before every sip of coffee. His heart raced, and thoughts swirled. Was this some kind of twisted joke? Had he, in his 40 years, somehow managed to forget an identical twin? Or maybe, in the vast maze of human genetics, had nature simply recycled his features in another soul? He was so engrossed in his thoughts that he hardly noticed his phone vibrating furiously against the wooden table. It was a call from the bank's headquarters, the caller ID flashing his manager's name. "Robert," the voice boomed as soon as he answered. "We have a situation. An account discrepancy. Need you back immediately." Robert glanced back at the man, who was now deeply engrossed in his paper. With a deep breath, he decided to confront the stranger after addressing the urgency at work. "I'll be right there," he replied, hurriedly paying for his coffee. But fate had other plans. When Robert cast one last, lingering look toward the corner table, the man was gone, leaving behind an empty cup and an aura of profound mystery. The city's rhythm, which had been so familiar just moments before, now felt unsettling and strange. The echoing hallways of the bank were synonymous with Robert's understanding of his world. Each step he took on the pristine marble floors was accompanied by the rhythmic tick-tock of the grand clock by the entrance. Today, however, as he hurried back to his office, the surroundings seemed surreal, as if he was walking through a dream. Once the account discrepancy was sorted out, a relatively minor error that took more time than it should have, Robert's thoughts immediately returned to the mysterious man at the cafe. He found himself scanning faces in the bank, half expecting to see that hauntingly familiar reflection staring back at him. His day took a turn for the bizarre when Sarah, a junior associate, stopped him in the hallway. "Thanks for the advice on that stock, Robert. My parents are thrilled with the returns. I didn't know you attended those small investment parties." Robert blinked, perplexed. "I didn't give any advice, Sarah, and I haven't been to any parties recently." She chuckled lightly. "Must have been another late night for you. Don't work too hard," and went on her way. The feeling of unease deepened as the day wore on. At lunch, his friend and colleague, Mike, mentioned a night out they had supposedly shared the previous weekend. "Man, those jokes you cracked were something else." Mike laughed. Robert, feeling the weight of confusion pressing down, managed a weak smile. "Must have been quite a night. I can hardly remember." He was lying, of course. His weekend had been uneventful, spent mostly reading. But the incident that truly shook him to his core came later in the evening. As he was leaving the bank, Mrs. Peters, a close family friend and confidant of his late mother, approached him. "Robert, dear," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I wanted to thank you for our talk at your father's grave last week. It felt good to share those memories and emotions. I hadn't realized how much guilt you held about not being there when he passed." A cold shiver ran down Robert's spine. He had not visited his father's grave in months, haunted by memories and regrets. He stared at Mrs. Peters, mouth agape, words failing him. Seeing his shocked expression, she reached out, touching his arm gently. "It's okay, dear. It was therapeutic for both of us. Take care." She walked away, leaving Robert in a whirlwind of disbelief. He tried to convince himself that maybe these were innocent mistakes, simple cases of confusion. But the pit in his stomach grew heavier, and by the time he returned home, Robert was filled with an ineffable dread. Were these just coincidences? Or was the man from the cafe, his doppelganger, living moments of his life for him? The bank was more than just a workplace for Robert. It was a sanctuary, a place where everything made sense. Numbers were predictable, they followed patterns, and patterns were comforting. However, recent events were fracturing his solace. A few days had passed since the strange encounters, but they weighed heavily on Robert's mind. In his office, he found himself staring blankly at spreadsheets, the numbers blurring into a fog of confusion. As lunchtime approached, he took a moment to glance out the window, hoping for a momentary escape from his spiraling thoughts. The busy streets below showcased the city in its vibrant daily rhythm. Amidst the crowd, a familiar face caught his attention. It was him, or rather, the man who looked just like him. He was outside the bank, standing in a tight embrace with Clara, Robert's distant cousin who occasionally visited the bank for her business transactions. The sight was paralyzing. Here was his mirror image, sharing an intimate moment with a member of his family. Overwhelmed by a mixture of dread, intrigue, and a need for clarity, Robert hurriedly left his office. He followed from a distance, trying to remain inconspicuous. The doppelganger, along with Clara, walked through the city's labyrinthine streets. Their conversation seemed lighthearted, punctuated by occasional laughter. Robert's thoughts raced. Was this man a long-lost twin? An imposter? What did he want with Clara? The uncertainty was gnawing at him. His pursuit led him to an older part of the city. The familiar hum of modern life gave way to the muted sounds of the past. Cobblestone streets echoed with memories, and aged brick buildings whispered stories of days gone by. The pair finally stopped in front of a grand but worn-out apartment complex. As Clara bid the man goodbye with a warm hug, Robert hid behind a nearby kiosk, waiting for her to leave. He took a deep breath, deciding to confront the man once and for all. Before Robert could gather his courage, the doppelganger entered the building. Without a second thought, Robert followed, his heart pounding loudly against the eerie silence of the building's corridor. The creaky staircase led him to the third floor, where he heard the faint echo of a key turning in a lock. The door opened to apartment 312. Waiting for a moment to ensure he wasn't noticed, Robert cautiously approached the door, which was ajar. He could hear the soft hum of a song from inside, one he recognized from his childhood. The melody was bittersweet, reminiscent of lullabies sung by his father. Gathering every ounce of courage, Robert pushed the door open further. The dimly lit apartment was a haunting portrayal of memories, with photographs that seemed eerily familiar yet distant. The man, now aware of Robert's presence, turned around. Their eyes locked. It was like staring into a reflective pool, only the water was murky, filled with secrets and pain. The silence was suffocating, both men held in the thrall of an unspoken connection. The apartment was a shrine of half-familiar memories. There were photographs, some of Robert's family and some of people he didn't recognize but bore striking resemblances. It was as if two worlds had collided, and in the chaos, truths had been scattered. Finally, the doppelganger broke the silence, his voice surprisingly soft. "You must be full of questions. Have a seat, Robert." Robert, hesitating only for a moment, took the offered chair, his eyes never leaving the other man. "Who are you?" was all he managed to whisper. "I'm Daniel," he replied, his gaze heavy with a mixture of pain and longing. "I'm your half-brother." The words hung in the air like a thick fog, obscuring everything Robert thought he knew. He tried to process the revelation, but his thoughts were a cacophony of confusion. Daniel continued, "Our father had another life, Robert, a life before you. He was married to my mother first, but when things fell apart, he abandoned us. I was just a child, and he left, never to return. He started anew, with your mother with you." Robert's mind raced back to his childhood memories, trying to find clues, hints of a past his father never mentioned. He recalled times when his father would look distant, lost in thoughts that he never shared. "I never hated you." Daniel's voice brought him back to the present. "In fact, I envied you. While you grew up in his warmth, I was left in the cold shadows of his absence. I watched from afar, always wishing to know the fatherly love you took for granted." Robert's heart ached. The weight of Daniel's words was palpable, an agony of years of unfulfilled yearnings. "But why now?" Robert inquired, his voice shaky. "Why impersonate me? Why enter my life?" Daniel hesitated, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I wanted to feel a part of something, to experience even a fragment of the life I was denied. By becoming you, even if only for brief moments, I felt closer to our Father, closer to understanding what it was like to be loved." The room was thick with emotions, years of suppressed pain surfacing. Robert was overwhelmed by guilt for a life he hadn't chosen, and Daniel was consumed by the sorrow of a love he had never known. For what felt like hours, the brothers sat in Daniel's dimly lit apartment, sharing stories, regrets, and revelations. The atmosphere was a delicate blend of bitterness and understanding. Two lives that had run parallel now intersected in the most profound way. As the conversation flowed, Robert learned more about the hardships Daniel had faced. Without the support of their father, Daniel's mother struggled financially and emotionally. The absence of a father figure took a toll on him, pushing him to extremes in a bid to fill the void. The tales of hardship and longing painted a picture that Robert had never imagined, making him question his own privileges. Daniel cleared his throat, hesitating before his next words. "Robert, I've been thinking for a while now, and perhaps it's an absurd thought, but maybe, just maybe, you'd entertain it." Robert nodded, encouraging him to continue. "I want to buy your life, or at least rent it for a while." Robert looked at him, startled, trying to decipher if it was a cruel jest. But Daniel's eyes held a raw desperation that was hard to ignore. Seeing Robert's confusion, Daniel elaborated, "I don't mean it in a sinister way. I want to step into your life, experience the warmth of relationships I've never known, feel the joy of attending a family gathering without being the outsider, understand what it's like to walk in a world where I'm recognized and loved." Robert blinked, processing the audacity of the proposal. "And what happens to me?" Daniel hesitated for a moment before answering. "You can start fresh, somewhere new, somewhere far. With the money I've saved over the years, you can live comfortably, finding new experiences, perhaps even healing from the ones the past has inflicted upon you." Robert felt a chill run down his spine. The proposition was unsettling, yet there was a part of him, a small voice at the back of his mind, that considered it. Here was an opportunity to escape, to shed the skin of a life that was becoming increasingly suffocating. "Think about it," Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible. "A chance to redefine yourself, away from the shadows of our Father's choices. And in return, you grant me a brief experience of a life I've always coveted." As the evening grew darker and the room colder, Robert wrestled with the emotions that the proposal elicited. The thought of relinquishing his identity was terrifying, but the allure of starting afresh was undeniably tempting. In the days that followed, Robert was a vessel of turmoil. His everyday world, once filled with routine and predictability, had spiraled into a realm of existential questioning. The bank's tall columns, the regular customers, even the very desk he sat behind, everything felt alien, as if he was seeing them through a distorting lens. As he walked through the corridors, he could feel the stares of colleagues, hear the whispers of meetings he hadn't attended and contributions he hadn't made. While they were discussing transactions with Robert, he knew they were really interacting with Daniel. The blur between reality and pretense was disorienting. One evening after work, Robert took a detour to the old neighborhood park where he and his father had spent countless hours. The wooden bench where they'd once shared ice creams and stories now seemed to be just an empty piece of furniture, its varnish worn out and faded. Sitting there, memories flooded back. The laughter, the advice, the silent moments they shared, all felt like they belonged to someone else's life. He remembered his father's voice, his words of wisdom, his comforting hand on a troubled brow. Those moments of genuine connection stood in stark contrast to Daniel's tales of abandonment and yearning. Tears stunned Robert's eyes as he thought of Daniel. He could no longer view his life without acknowledging the shadow of Daniel's absence. Every cherished memory with their father was now tainted with the understanding of a simultaneous neglect. He recalled Daniel's apartment, the photographs, the silent screams of longing from every frame. and the melancholy tombs that whispered tales of a forgotten son. The weight of their shared lineage, of DNA and destiny, pressed heavily on him. Late one night, Robert visited his father's grave, bathed in the soft glow of the moon. The tombstone, a silent testament to a life of secrets, stood unaffected by the son's internal chaos. He desperately wished for a sign, some guidance from the man whose choices had unknowingly shaped two destinies. "I never asked for any of this," Robert murmured, his voice shaking with emotion. "I didn't ask for a life at the expense of another. How do I make this right?" But the grave offered no answers, only the deafening silence of the night. Over the next few days, Robert observed his life with a heightened sensitivity. He noted the warm greetings from neighbors, the affectionate nuzzles from his pet dog, and the familiar embrace of family members. These seemingly mundane moments were now precious treasures, fragments of a life that someone else coveted. Torn between the comfort of his existence and the profound pain reflected in Daniel's eyes, Robert was at a crossroads. He began to question the very essence of identity and existence. What defined him? Was it the relationships he nurtured or the memories he created? The clock was ticking, and a decision loomed large. The following week, Robert stood outside Daniel's apartment, taking a moment to steel himself before knocking. The door opened to reveal Daniel, his expression a mix of hope and apprehension. Without preamble, Robert began, "I've thought long and hard about your proposal. It's audacious, unsettling, and unlike anything I've ever considered." He paused, taking a breath. "But I see the profound pain in your eyes, a pain that our father's choices inflicted upon you. If I can help mend that, even in a small way, then perhaps it's worth it." Daniel's face transformed from a look of tense anticipation to one of disbelief. You would do that for me?" Robert nodded. "But there are conditions. This can't be a permanent arrangement. We need an end date, a time when I reclaim my life, and you find a way to forge your own path." Daniel blinked away tears. "Of course, I understand. I don't want to steal your life permanently. I just want to know what it's like, to bask in its warmth, even if briefly." Over the next few hours, the two brothers sat down and drafted a meticulous agreement. They discussed every detail, from the division of financial assets to the intricacies of daily life. They set a duration of 6 months for the exchange. Robert would leave the city, adopting a new identity and a new life, while Daniel would step into the shoes, experiencing the love and familiarity Robert had always known. As they discussed the particulars, Robert emphasized the importance of maintaining the relationships he cherished. "Treat them well, Daniel. They are not just names on a paper. They are people who've shaped my life, and I trust you to respect and cherish them." Daniel nodded gravely. "I promise. This isn't just about living your life, Robert. It's about understanding, learning, and perhaps finding a way to forgive our father for the choices he made." The agreement was set. They decided on a date for the switch, allowing both enough time to prepare. As Robert left the apartment, he felt a weight lifting off his shoulders. The decision, although difficult, felt right in a way he couldn't quite explain. Over the next few days, Robert began distancing himself from his routine life. He spent time with family and friends, cherishing the moments while keeping his impending departure a secret. Every interaction was bittersweet, every goodbye left unspoken. Finally, the day arrived. Robert packed his essentials, leaving behind memories, belongings, and a life that had defined him for 40 years. As he handed the keys to Daniel, the two shared a moment of mutual understanding. "Take care of them," Robert whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I will," Daniel replied, his gaze filled with gratitude. With one last look at his past life, Robert stepped into the unknown, while Daniel, with a mix of anxiety and excitement, prepared to step into a life he had only dreamed of. The coastal town of Larkhaven was a stark contrast to the hustle and bustle of the city Robert had left behind. Nestled between sprawling cliffs and azure waters, it was a haven of serenity and introspection. As Robert wandered its cobble streets and breathed in the salty air, he felt an odd mixture of liberation and loss. He had taken up residence in a modest cottage overlooking the sea. Every morning, he would wake up to the sound of waves crashing against the shore, a constant reminder of the vastness of life and the ebb and flow of destiny. The town's residents were warm and welcoming, but Robert chose to maintain a distance, not ready to form attachments. As days turned into weeks, the pain of separation from his former life began to fade. He kept himself busy, finding solace in painting the picturesque landscapes, reading books that had been on his list for years, and writing long letters to no one in particular, pouring out his feelings and experiences. One evening, as the sun painted the sky with hues of orange and gold, Robert sat on the porch of his cottage, pen and paper in hand. He began to pen down his journey, from the startling discovery of Daniel to the decision that had changed the course of their lives. The decision to let go of my life was not born out of weakness or escapism. It was about redemption and understanding. It was about giving someone a chance to experience love and belonging, even if momentarily. He wrote about the joys and sorrows, the love he felt for the family and friends he left behind, and the hope that Daniel was treating them with the kindness and respect they deserved. Perhaps in some twisted way, this was destiny's design. Two souls, intertwined by blood and fate, seeking solace and understanding in the choices they made. While one sought a fresh start, the other yearned for a taste of a life denied to him. As the weeks turned into months, Robert received an occasional letter from Daniel, assuring him that things were going well. The letters were a source of comfort, but also a stark reminder of the life he had temporarily relinquished. One day, a letter from Daniel arrived that was different from the rest. It spoke of a profound realization. "I've walked in your shoes, Robert, and while I've felt the warmth of the relationships you've nurtured, I've come to understand that true contentment lies in forging one's own path. Living your life has taught me that I need to find my own purpose, my own connections, rather than coveting someone else's." The letter ended with gratitude and a promise to uphold the sanctity of the agreement they had made. As the end date of their agreement neared, Robert felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. The thought of returning to his old life was both comforting and daunting. But he also knew that Larkhaven had given him a new perspective, a fresh lens through which to view his past, present, and future. The final day arrived. As Robert packed his belongings and prepared to head back to the city, he took one last look at the horizon. The vast expanse of the sea, with its infinite mysteries, seemed to mirror the complexities of life itself. Returning to the familiar streets of his hometown, Robert was welcomed with open arms. Friends and family remarked on the subtle changes in him, a newfound depth in his gaze, a calmness in his demeanor. Robert and Daniel met soon after, and the reunion was poignant. They spoke little, their shared experience speaking volumes. Both had grown, both had learned, and both had found a piece of themselves in the other's life. As Robert settled back into his routine, he realized that life was not about holding on to the familiar, but about embracing change and seeking understanding. His bond with Daniel grew stronger, not as mere reflections of each other, but as two distinct souls connected by shared history and mutual respect.